Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to a very special upload of Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Tonight's Halloween horror, like a xenomorph, is nestled almost dead center in the 13 days of Halloween, ready to burst out with pumpkin spice blood splatter. So, grab a cider or your favorite fall treat. Tonight, only tricks will be handed out. Doughboy420 calls this one Happy Halloween.
It was Halloween Day, and Billy Nera had just gotten on the bus to make his trip to school. Billy's school was one of those uptight schools that didn't allow children to dress up for Halloween, but unfortunately, Billy didn't get the memo. Billy stepped onto the bus wearing a vampire costume, just like Dracula, complete with a cape and red vest over a white shirt, all topped off with the classic plastic vampire teeth. Billy quickly noticed that everyone on the bus was in their casual, everyday clothes, and he knew what was about to ensue. The bus burst out into laughter, with kids pointing and making fun of his outfit. Billy lowered his head and passed by everyone as they joked and laughed at his expense. He made his way halfway down the bus and sat down in his usual seat, about halfway through. "Dude, don't you know you're not supposed to dress up for Halloween at school?" A familiar voice chimed in from behind Billy. It was Cliff, who was pretty much Billy's only friend at school. "I guess not." "Well, you've only been here for less than a year, so I guess you wouldn't. Hopefully Mrs. McNamara will understand," Cliff added. Billy knew that wouldn't be the case. Miss McNamara was her first period history teacher, and she was a total bitch. Strict and by the book. No exceptions. Billy would be lucky to get off with a lecture, but detention would be more likely.
"I want to suck your blood,"
a voice shouted out from the back of the bus in a stereotypical vampire expression. It was Brad, quarterback of the football team and all-around asshole. He was always poking fun at Billy, ever since Billy had moved to town just under a year ago. After spending some time on the bus, listening to Brad and his big dumb buddy Gerald make jokes about him the whole way, the bus arrived at their school and Billy jumped off and quickly ran to his locker to stuff his cape, vest, and plastic fangs inside to try and avoid the harassment for the rest of the day and avoid punishment from Miss McNamara.
"Aw, what's the matter?"
Brad said in a mocking voice as he passed by Billy.
"Little crybaby can't take a joke."
Gerald tagged along right beside him, laughing at his jokes, calling him Dracula and telling him he should just go back to Pennsylvania. "It's Transylvania, moron," Billy said under his breath.
"What was that?"
Gerald said as he approached Billy and pinned him against his locker. "It's Transylvania. Dracula's from Transylvania," Billy corrected him.
"You think I don't know that, you little punk?"
Gerald added. "Break it up, boys," Mrs. McNamara said to the two of them as she passed by. "The bell's about to ring. Get to class," she continued. Gerald let go of Billy with a grunt and made his way into their first period history class.
"You're lucky Mrs. Medusa stopped him. Otherwise, you'd be choking on your fangs, Vlad,"
Brad said to Billy as he pushed him roughly against his locker. Soon after, Brad also made his way to class, and Billy followed him through the door. After class was settled down and seated, Miss McNamara began telling them about Halloween and how it became the holiday that it is today. She said it used to be called Samhain, and that this day was supposed to be the day that the barrier between the land of the living and the land of the dead was at its thinnest. She told them about the Celtic legend that told of a man that sought after a gold-hilted sword of King Ailill, and in order to obtain this sword, he would have to go out on the night of Samhain and make his way to the gallows where a man had been executed. There, he would have to tie a twig to the leg of the hangman. She explained that before him, every man that had undertaken this quest had been scared off by the spirits of the dead, and all of them were unable to complete the task. It was about this time that Billy felt something hit the back of his head. He reached back to find something wet and gross stuck in his hair. He grabbed a hold of it and brought it back around to look at it. It was a balled up and soaking wet piece of paper. Billy looked over his shoulder in time to see Brad hide a straw behind his back. He had nailed Billy with another spit wad. Nothing new. Brad was an asshole, and Billy was used to the crap that he got from him. Miss McNamara's class ended not long afterward, and the rest of the day was pretty uneventful, until Billy got back on the bus anyway. As Billy sat there, he could hear giggles and mumbling coming from the back of the bus. He looked back to see Brad sitting there, one arm around his girlfriend, Lauren, and the other covering his face to hide the obvious laughter he was trying to conceal. Billy shrugged it off and tried to ignore it. He looked out the window at all the Halloween decorations that were put up across town. As the bus passed by the park, Billy noticed the town's Halloween display that they had set up there. A fake cemetery, some rubber bats hanging from the gazebo in the center of the park, and some mannequins dressed up as zombies scattered about. And there was one display that stood out to him. A large, wooden gallows, complete with a hangman dummy. The sight of this dummy made Billy remember the legend that he had heard in class earlier that day. He imagined himself being the hero of the story, obtaining the gold-hilted sword and saving his kingdom. Billy was soon snapped out of his trance by Cliff informing him that the bus was at his stop. What? Billy responded. Just stop, man, Cliff answered. Okay, Billy said as he stood up to exit the bus. It was at this point that nearly everyone in the back of the bus burst out into laughter, all of them laughing and pointing at Billy. Billy looked back at them with a confused look on his face.
Billy shit his pants!
Brad shouted out between laughs.
The little baby pooped himself,
Lauren added soon after. Billy reached down to his behind and felt something warm and sticky. He brought his hand around to discover a brown substance on his fingers. He quickly noticed what it was. When he sat down, someone had snuck a melted chocolate bar beneath him to make it look like he had soiled himself. Billy turned away from them, tears beginning to well up in his eyes as he stormed quickly off the bus, ignoring the taunts and laughs as he passed everyone by. He got off the bus as fast as he could and ran down the block from the bus stop to his house. "Hey, honey, how was school?" Billy's mom asked as he entered the house, but he ignored her and ran quickly to his room to change out of his clothes and throw his old pants into the wash. After donning a new pair of pants, he ran right back past his mom and out the door. He wanted to get away from people, away from everything. So he made his way to Hallbrook Hill that overlooked the town. This was the place where he went to unload and just sit and think about life. His peaceful place. There, it was like he was above all of his problems and away from all of his stress. It was the only place he could be happy. It was the only place where he didn't have to worry about his problems. You know, the only reason they pick on you is because you haven't been initiated, a familiar voice said from behind Billy. Billy turned to see his friend Cliff standing next to him. Initiated? Billy asked.
Yeah.
Another voice said from Billy's other side. It was Tiffany, Cliff's girlfriend and Lauren's best friend. What are you guys talking about? Billy asked. You remember the legend that Miss McNamara told us about in class today? About the hangman? Cliff asked. Yeah? What about it? Billy replied.
It's kind of a tradition in this town for someone to go tie a twig to the dummy hangman's leg in the park.
Tiffany answered. Yeah, we've all done it. Kind of a little ritual to prove your bravery. Cliff added. That sounds stupid. Tie a twig to a dummy's leg to prove how brave you are? That's dumb, Billy replied. Yeah, it is pretty stupid, but it's tradition, and they won't accept you unless you've done it. I know it sounds dumb, but if you do it, they'll probably leave you alone, Cliff continued.
Yeah.
Tiffany added.
Why don't you do it, Billy? I bet they will leave you alone then.
She insisted. Yeah? You think so? Billy asked. Of course, Cliff answered. Here, take this and tie a twig to the dummy's leg, Cliff added, handing Billy a lime green shoelace. Alright, I'll do it, Billy said enthusiastically, now feeling a little more confidence in himself. See you later, man. Just wait till midnight after all the trick-or-treaters have gone home. Then go tie the twig on, and I'm sure Brad and Gerald will quit their shit, Cliff said, as he waved goodbye to Billy and walked away, down the hill with Tiffany. You bet, Billy said. I'll see you later, man, he continued. It was settled. Billy had decided that he would go tie the twig to the hangman in the park, and then all would be good. Maybe then the popular kids would finally leave him alone. Billy went home in a much better mood, had a good conversation with his mom and dad over dinner, did his homework, and then prepared to leave the house to commence Operation Twig Tying. Billy waited until about 11:30 before he left his house. Then he made his way toward the empty park at the center of town. The streets were abandoned, and Billy couldn't help but be a little creeped out at the deafening silence of the empty town. But he wouldn't let the fear get to him. He clenched the shoelace in his fist and walked ever closer to the park. It was nearing midnight when Billy finally reached the park at the center of town. He looked down at the lime-colored shoelace in his hand and then up at the dummy hanging at the gallows. All right, Billy, let's tie the twig to this thing and then we can get out of here, Billy told himself, before he picked up a random twig at the base of a nearby tree and then approached the gallows. Billy made it a few yards away from the hangman before he began to hear something. It was like inaudible whispers in the darkness, and it froze him in place for a moment. Hello? Who's there? Billy asked, but he got no reply. He shrugged it off and continued to the hangman dummy. Billy slowly walked up the stairs of the gallows, and the wood creaked beneath his feet with every step. Billy made it to the hangman when he was again frozen in place. Billy. This time, he was sure that he had heard something. It was his name. A voice had clearly whispered his name, a voice that rang out from beneath his feet. Someone was calling him from beneath the gallows. Billy was scared now, but he was here to do a job. He quickly fastened the twig to the leg of the hangman dummy with the shoelace and then turned to run back down the stairs and get the hell out of there. But when he turned around, his heart nearly stopped in his chest. Some of the zombie mannequins that were all placed around the fake tombstones were no longer stationary. Instead, they were now shambling towards him and calling out to him in a gurgling and raspy tone.
Billy.
They called to him.
I'm going to eat you, Billy.
They told him in that same scary tone. It was then that a hand reached out from beneath the gallows and grabbed hold of Billy's leg. He screamed in terror and jumped off the gallows, but was surrounded by 5 lumbering figures that lurched ever closer toward him. He was cornered between the gazebo and the zombies that sought to devour him. All he could do was curl up into a ball on the ground and accept his fate. He began to cry from terror as he clenched his legs to his chest and huddled himself against the side of the gazebo. It was then that a chorus of laughter broke out from the zombies.
Oh my god, what a baby.
Gerald laughed, pointing at Billy.
Holy shit, that was good. Did you see the look on his face?
Lauren then called out.
Wow, that little baby actually believed we were zombies? What a wimp!
Brad added. Billy then looked up at them, tears still streaming from his eyes, and it began to sink in. The zombies weren't zombies at all. Instead, it was Brad, Gerald, and Lauren. Then, he saw the 2 remaining zombies, Cliff and Tiffany, giggling to themselves. I'm sorry, man, but you gotta admit, that was pretty funny, Cliff said, trying to hold back his own laughter.
Dude, you should have seen your face. That was priceless.
Tiffany added between laughs. Billy looked at Cliff with a pleading look in his eyes. He'd been betrayed by his only friend, and he was devastated by it. What the hell? Billy yelled. Come on, man, it was just a joke, Cliff replied.
Aw, what's the matter? Baby gonna cry some more?
Brad added. Fuck you! Billy yelled back at Brad.
Who the fuck you think you're talking to?
Billy got up to his feet and pushed Brad in anger. Instinctively, Brad pushed Billy back, causing Billy's small frame to stumble backwards where he tripped over one of the fake plastic tombstones. Billy stumbled backward over the tombstone and fell to the ground, his head cracking upon the corner of one of the steps of the gazebo. His body went limp, and for a moment, he laid there motionless as the group of them looked on. Then, they soon noticed the pool of red that began to form beneath his head, his eyes still open, staring off into the darkness. Shit. Billy? Billy? Cliff yelled. You fucking killed him! Cliff yelled at Brad.
I didn't mean...
Brad fumbled for his words, but he was in shock and couldn't speak.
We should get out of here,
Lauren said. We can't just leave him here, Cliff yelled again.
Come on, let's go,
Gerald said, grabbing Brad's arm and pulling him away from Billy's body. Brad didn't say anything and just went along with Gerald and Lauren. The 3 of them ran away toward Gerald's house down the street.
Come on, Cliff,
Tiffany said quietly. We can't just leave him here, Cliff replied, nearly sobbing. She insisted again that they needed to go, and that he knew it, pulling on Cliff's arm. Reluctantly, Cliff rose to his feet and followed along with her, looking over his shoulder at the lifeless body of Billy as he walked away. He then turned away from the sight and continued on, not being able to help but feel responsible for what happened to Billy. But he also feared going to prison for being an accessory to murder, so he kept it to himself and decided to just move forward with his life. Brad, Lauren, and Gerald had all arrived at Gerald's house, and together, the 3 of them went down to Gerald's room in the basement.
What are we gonna do?
Gerald asked the other 2.
It's okay. Brad had gloves on, right? So there's no proof we were ever there.
Lauren answered.
You sure?
Gerald asked.
Yeah, we're all good. He just tripped and fell. That's it. It was dark and he just tripped and fell and we were never there, all right?
Lauren continued, Brad just sat there on the couch in silence.
Right, we were never there. Right, Brad?
Gerald said.
Right.
Brad answered quietly. It was then that Cliff and Tiffany joined them in the basement, where Lauren and Gerald filled them in on their plan. There was no proof that they were there, so everything was okay. Everything's not okay. Billy is dead, Cliff replied to them.
You keep your mouth shut, Cliff.
Gerald threatened. Yeah? And what if I don't? Cliff asked.
You want to wind up like Billy?
Gerald added. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Cliff asked.
You know exactly what I mean.
Gerald told him.
Guys, stop.
Tiffany said.
Don't worry. Cliff won't tell anyone. Right, Cliff?
She continued. Right. Cliff sighed reluctantly. It was at that time that the doorbell rang, and everyone in the room froze. Everyone was terrified that the cops had come to take them away. But then reality sunk in. No one knew what had happened besides them.
It's probably some late trick-or-treaters,
Lauren said.
Trick-or-treaters? At this time?
Gerald said.
Just ignore them. They'll go away.
The doorbell then rang again, and it became obvious that the trick-or-treaters weren't going anywhere. So Gerald got up and began his trek up the stairs to give out candy to the kids that were up well after their bedtime. He knew that if he didn't, he would be stuck cleaning up the toilet paper from the tree out front, because that's what happens if you don't give out candy on Halloween. Either you give out a treat, or you get a trick. While Gerald was upstairs tending to the trick-or-treaters, the remainder of them sat in the basement in silence. It was Lauren who broke the silence when she reached up into her bag of treats that she had gotten earlier in the night and pulled out a candy bar. She opened the loose wrapper and bit down into the chocolate. Soon after eating about halfway through the bar, Lauren began to choke and gag. Her hands grasped at her throat as she began to struggle.
Lauren? Are you okay?
Brad finally spoke up. She continued to gasp for air before she suddenly began to cough up large amounts of blood.
Oh my God, Lauren!
Tiffany yelled as both her and Brad got up to attempt to help Lauren. Lauren gagged and gurgled, coughing up blood and shards of what appeared to be glass. She then began to turn blue before she dropped to the floor and began convulsing.
Oh shit! Lauren! Lauren!
Brad yelled, trying to help her, but it was too late. She soon fell limp with blood trickling out of the corner of her mouth, her eyes staring blankly back at Brad. Tiffany burst up the stairs to try and find Gerald for help. They all needed to call an ambulance for her friend. She ran through the house toward the front door, which was still open.
Gerald! Lauren needs help!
She screamed as she ran through the front door, where she found Gerald, which caused her to let out another blood-curdling scream. Gerald's body lay there on the ground in a large pool of blood. He had been decapitated. His head appeared to have been ripped off at the neck. The wound was jagged, and strings of flesh had been stretched off of his body. His head was clearly not cut off. It had been ripped off. Tiffany's eyes then followed the blood trail from his body laying on the porch and up the white banister that lined it, and there sat Gerald's head, blood still running down the banister from not only his neck, but also from the holes where his eyes and nose once were. His head had been carved open, and inside the empty sockets, she could see the flickering of a single candle burning within his hollowed-out head. Tiffany then looked over to see the three small figures standing beside her, all of them covered in blood and gore. They appeared to be two boys and one girl, dressed in creepy, old costumes that you would see in old pictures from the 20s and 30s. Crude Halloween costumes that appeared to be a skeleton, a ghost, and a witch. But upon further investigation, she realized that the children weren't wearing costumes at all. These costumes were their actual skin, stretched and disfigured to form disgusting shapes. Before Tiffany could make another sound, the three horrid trick-or-treaters jumped on her and began ripping her apart, just as they had done to Gerald. But instead of merely decapitating her, they continued on, ripping her into small chunks of flesh. Piece by piece, bit by bit, they ate her, and what chunks of flesh they didn't consume, they wrapped in small orange and black candy wrappers. They stuffed their newfound treats into blood-soaked bags and baskets before they moved into the house to find their next victim. Downstairs, Brad and Cliff were left mortified by the death of Lauren. Cliff sat with his head in his hands, and Brad held the body of his dead girlfriend. They had somehow not heard Tiffany's scream of terror, but instead they began to hear strange laughing and giggling of children from between the floorboards, emanating from the floor above them. The two of them sat there for a moment, looking up at the ceiling with confused expressions. Brad decided that too much time had passed, and that he needed to get help for Lauren. He slowly rested her back down onto the floor before turning up the stairs to find a phone. He ran into the kitchen, where the house phone was, and dialed 911, but instead of hearing a helpful voice, he heard a loud, screeching, static noise.
What the hell?
He said to himself, before hanging up and dialing again, but he only got the same deafening sound of screeching static. He knew that he needed to get help. Someone had to help Lauren. He ran past the now closed front door and made his way upstairs to the second floor to try and awake Gerald's parents so that they could help her. But when he burst through the bedroom door and ran inside, he found that the room was empty. Gerald's parents were nowhere to be found. It was then that Brad heard the bedroom door slowly creak open and close behind him. He turned around to see the skin-stretched ghost boy with his blood-covered hand, holding onto the doorknob. His eyes grew wide with terror as the two other disfigured children pounced upon him. He struggled against them, but he found that it was useless. He was much larger than they were, and under normal circumstances, he would have easily been able to throw them around like a couple of rag dolls. But these were not normal circumstances, because these were not normal children. The two small figures were much, much stronger than a football quarterback, and they manhandled him easily into submission. They threw him down into a chair before the two of them began to dance swiftly around him. They held what appeared to be toilet paper in their hands as they danced playfully around. Brad attempted to break free, but it was as if the toilet paper was more like rope. He could not resist. He could not break free. Soon he was wrapped up completely, tied to the chair with this unbreakable toilet paper. He yelled and screamed for help, but no one came. The three ghoulish children just stood there quietly, tilting their heads from side to side and examining the terrified teen.
Please stop!
Brad yelled at them, but they didn't care.
Please!
He again pleaded with them. It was then that the witch girl pulled out a carton of eggs from her blood-soaked sack of treats. The witch girl looked down at the eggs, her wart-covered nose, with her skin stretched tightly to her face, pointed downward toward the floor, and her dark, sunken-in eyes appeared to light up with glee as she retrieved an egg from the wooden, brown carton. The skeleton and ghost boy soon followed suit, each of them grabbing an egg from the carton. Brad quickly noticed that these were no ordinary eggs. Instead, they were rotten, green, and without them even being cracked open, the thick, disgusting aroma of sulfur began to fill the air. The three of them grinned at Brad with yellow and rotten-out teeth before curling their arms into a position to throw them at Brad. He screamed and fought against the toilet paper, but it was hopeless. He had no escape. He sat there and just waited to be covered with putrid goo of rotten eggs. The three of them then began to pelt his face with eggs, one after another, but instead of rotten goo, the eggs were filled with with something much, much worse. Brad screamed in pain as the viscous substance within the eggs began to slowly melt away his face. His skin melted away to muscle, and his muscles melted away to bone. He continued to struggle, but it was pointless, and he began to accept his fate as the flesh slowly melted away and began to ooze off of him and onto the toilet paper that bound him to the chair. His flesh steamed away into the air and plopped down in chunks of oozing flesh onto his lap. His screams turned into gurgles as the acidic goo melted away his vocal cords, and then there was nothing left of his face but a few strips of flesh that clung loosely to his skull. Strands of skin and muscle hung from what was left of his face, and he was now silent. One last breath escaped from between his skeletal lips, and he was dead. Downstairs, Cliff sat there, staring at the lifeless body of his friend. It had been a long time since his friends had gone upstairs, and he began to fear that something had happened to them. He began to fear that maybe the police had come, and they were all now sitting in the back of squad cars, and that he would be joining them soon. But he couldn't stay down there forever, so he made his way upstairs to find them. The house was silent and completely empty. Cliff made his way through the house, but no one was in sight. He expected to see red and blue flashing lights outside, but everything was dark and quiet. He went out into the kitchen to find the phone dangling off of the hook. He picked it up and put it to his ear, but he heard only silence. He clicked on the hook a few times, but there was still only silence. He figured that the electricity had gone out since he had come upstairs and hung up the phone to continue on the search for his friends. He walked past the front door and on past a basket full of orange and black, wrapped Halloween treats. Cliff noticed a kind of coppery smell in the air as he walked up the stairs towards Gerald's parents' bedroom. "Hello?" he said as he crept his way up the stairs. "Tiff? Brad?" he continued, still walking slowly up the stairs. He made it to the closed bedroom door of Gerald's parents and slowly swung the door open with a creak. Cliff almost vomited from what he saw inside the room. He saw the melted corpse of Brad, still strapped to the chair, but his face was so far gone, he was no longer recognizable. "Shit," Cliff said in a panic as he turned back and ran down the stairs to escape the house. Cliff barged through the front door of the house to find Gerald's head still sitting there on the banister, with a candle still burning inside of it. He screamed and then ran past it, down the stairs and out onto the street. Quickly he ran door to door, banging on each of them and screaming for help. But no one came. Each and every house on the block was dark, and it appeared as though no one was home. He tried the doorknobs, but every house was locked. He banged on the wooden doors and pleaded for help, but his cries echoed through the night, and no one heard them. No one that would help him, that is. The three trick-or-treaters then emerged from the darkness behind him, and there was just enough light from the full moon overhead to illuminate their twisted and contorted figures. He ran from them, tripping over his own feet and falling roughly onto the pavement of the road. He ran down the street until he again came across the park at the center of town. There, he saw the lifeless body of Billy, the friend that he had betrayed. He ran past him and continued screaming for help, but there was no one there to help him. The skeleton boy soon stepped out of the shadows ahead of him, causing Cliff to stop dead in his tracks. He then turned to run down another street, but the witch girl stepped out of the shadows there. He then ran back through the park near to where Billy's lifeless body was, but he was again stopped when he saw the ghost boy lurching towards him. He screamed and backed up against the gazebo as the three horrifying figures drew ever closer to him. They lurched forward, backing him against the gazebo next to Billy's body. Cliff curled into a ball, crying in fear against the gazebo's wall. "Please," he said. I'm sorry. He continued. "Please, leave me alone," he added. The three disgusting trick-or-treaters now surrounded him as he cowered in fear. Cliff then felt a hand upon his shoulder, and he looked back to find that it was Billy. But he was different. He was wearing the same vampire outfit that he had worn to school earlier, and his face looked off, like the skin of his face seemed to cling more tightly to his skull. "Billy?" he said, confused, followed by a scream of terror as the vampire boy bit down deeply into his neck.
I'd like to thank all the ghosts and goblins that made tonight's story possible. After all, what's Halloween without a friend or two to spend it with? Woo! And that's my point. It just wouldn't be the same. But I know you won't be the same either after tomorrow's Night 6 terror tale, sure to be a story you'll always dismember. Catch you like a victim then.